It was a dark and gloomy Halloween morning in 2020. The line between the living and the dead seemed a bit blurred, and then tragedy struck in a little corner of Texas. Livy Lewis was a young nurse recognized for her sweet character and goodness, and that night she was discovered dead in her car. There was one shot in her neck. Livy was slumped over the steering wheel, the door left wide open. It was a passerby who first saw her. From afar, Livy just looked like she had passed out from drinking or maybe knocked out cold. But as they got closer, they found the truth. She was gone. The witness immediately called 911, and soon officers were on the scene trying to piece together what had happened. But what they uncovered only raised more questions. The investigation quickly pointed to a man named Matthew Edgar, Livy's ex-boyfriend, because he was found curled up in the fetal position behind her car, with his boots, hat, and a rifle scattered around him. There was blood on his face, but no injuries to explain it. Plus, his story didn't add up when they questioned him. He said he had been drinking on his porch but did not remember how he ended up near Livy's car or why she was dead. His reaction to hearing about Livy's death also raised suspicions. He was crying, but it didn't seem real. No tears. It made the detectives uneasy. And the more the investigators dug, the stranger things got. They concluded that the rifle was the murder weapon, but there was no fingerprint or DNA on it. Yet a DNA test indicated the presence of another man's DNA, one they could not identify, creating an entirely new layer of confusion. Edgar's story was vague, his alibi non-existent. So many thought he was the one who'd done it. But others weren't so sure. Some wondered if someone else, someone close to Edgar, had done it. One cop was absolutely certain Edgar did it and was ready to bet his career on it. Others weren't so quick to jump to conclusions, pointing out that there were too many gaps in the story and too many unanswered questions. Livy's life was taken by a single rifle shot, but the full story of what happened that Halloween morning remains a mystery. What really happened to her? Who could kill a girl like her, and what could be the motive? You see, there are lots of mysteries surrounding it, and that's what we need to solve in this video. The 19-year-old Livy Lewis was a small-town girl from Hemp Hill, Texas, a town of less than 1,000 people. She had just graduated from high school. She was the kind of student who always got straight A's and always dreamed big. Livy had her heart set on becoming a nurse, then later a physician's assistant. She was already working as a certified nursing assistant at a local nursing home, where everyone loved her, from the residents to her co-workers. People respected her for her ambition, and it was clear she was going places. She even received a college scholarship, and she could hardly wait to get started on that next day of her life, always talking about her future goal, what she was going to achieve in school, and much more. But sadly, in that Halloween night, Livy was shot, and that took her life. Darcy Bass, her mother, heard about it when her friend called. It came to her like a ton of bricks. Livy's friends and colleagues all said wonderful things about her. Taylor Barnett, a nursing assistant who worked with Livy, said they became close. Taylor was a bit older with a young daughter, but they just clicked. Taylor said she loved how passionate Livy was about her work and how mature she was for her age. They spent a lot of time together, and Taylor could see how caring and dedicated Livy was. Bailey Williams, who knew Livy since kindergarten, said Livy was always more mature than the other kids. While other kids were off playing, Livy preferred stability. That maturity might have played a role in her relationship with Matthew Edgar, a 23-year-old man who was married to Montana Bockel and had 2 kids. Livy and Matthew started having a secret affair while she was still in high school. She finally ended things, but Matthew didn't quit. He continued to contact her, unhappy in his marriage, and ultimately confessed to cheating on his wife once again. Livy refused to give in and stated firmly that she did not want to be a homewrecker. Once everything went sour between him and his wife, Matthew ended the marriage, and soon Montana hired himself a divorce attorney. Matthew went out, but he did not give up his pursuit of Livy. With secrets, lying, cheating, and a messy mix of feelings, the course for the sorrowful events ahead was set in motion. Livy was already 18 years old by then. However, from one day to another, Montana turned around and demanded to be friends with Livy. Livy, being the people person she is, probably saw this as a chance to build a friendship. But Montana's motives? Well, they were a little murky. Some people even started wondering if she had an ulterior motive for getting too close to Livy. Then came Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough, who questioned Matthew about how things were going with both women. Matthew called everything awesome, saying he got along with both Montana and Livy, even going so far as to say his ex and Livy were big buddies. But he also told Livy to be careful with Montana. Sure, it was fine to keep things civil for the sake of the kids, but Matthew warned Livy not to get too close to his ex-wife because their past could complicate things. But as time progressed, things took a darker turn with Matthew. Livy's cousin Taylor started to notice that when Matthew drank, he became increasingly unpredictable. He would flare his temper, he'd get verbally abusive, and sometimes his behavior would just totally spin out of control. Taylor even tolerated Matthew crashing at Livy's place for a little while, but it didn't take long for his presence to be no longer wanted. It became pretty messy, and Taylor described the whole environment as abusive and unbearable. Even though Matthew would send Livy sweet texts like, "Good night, baby, I love you," the reality of their relationship was much darker. Livy started to send messages back, revealing how bad things really were. She would tell him that her body ached because of all the abuse. She knew deep inside what Matthew was doing was wrong, but she stayed with him, probably holding on to the idea that he could change. Taylor thought that Livy may have been in love with the version of Matthew she hoped he could be, though his actions painted a very different picture. Then came the summer of 2020. Livy was supposed to move to her new college, but instead, she decided to stay with Matthew and move in to help take care of his kids. She even redecorated their rooms, giving each one a different sports theme. But by August, things had hit rock bottom. Livy told Matthew how afraid she was of him, especially when he drank. She admitted she was scared of him and felt unsafe because of all the physical violence. It was clear she couldn't take it anymore. She did confide in her cousin Sydney Ebarb, sending her a shocking photo that showed Matthew had actually broken her nose. That picture made it crystal clear just how messed up the situation was. It was clear Livy was stuck in this toxic relationship, tangled up in fear and feelings. Then, in October 2020, the truth began to leak out. Text messages revealed that Matthew had been cheating on Livy, and one message said, "I didn't cheat on Livy with multiple women, just you. LOL." That pretty much destroyed whatever was left of their relationship. Livy finally decided to break it off with him. But in a small town like Hemphill, breaking free wasn't so easy. By Halloween morning that year, Livy and Matthew were back together. That is, lying by the roadside. That afternoon, Matthew lay in a hospital bed, his face covered with blood, where he claimed not to know how he had come to be. He claimed he drank a lot the previous night and admitted that the last time he had seen Livy was at Bobby Ozen's house when they had all been at a party. He said he had gone home, blacked out, and didn't know how he ended up on the ground between Livy's car and a black truck. The detectives didn't believe him, so they took samples of his blood for DNA analysis. After that, Matthew was arrested, charged with murder, but nothing at all occurred in his side. He didn't deny it, and explained anything. Finally, with Matthew in jail, the investigation continued. Texas law said the district attorney's office had 90 days to present enough evidence to a grand jury, or Matthew would walk. So, sheriff's investigator brought in the Texas Rangers for help. But some people, like Sean Dunn, a former deputy sheriff, and Matthew's buddy, kept saying Matthew was innocent. Sean claimed Matthew denied everything, said he loved Livy, and had no idea what happened. Then things went a little bit messy. The investigators began questioning Montana's association with Livy, as Montana was believed to have been involved with Matthew, who was still married to her then. They found some of her remarks a bit awkward, and one photo taken from the party shows her and Livy when Matthew seems to be ignored. Matthew and his mom have already suggested that somebody else, probably Montana, may be the killer of Livy. Matthew's mom even brought it up on a jailhouse call before Matthew cut her off. So the question of who really killed Livy is out there. Matthew Edgar was at Bobby Ozan's party, but things started getting worse as the night wore on. He drank a lot and became really irritable. He decided to leave the party, but something that happened later is a blur for him. But his ex-wife, Montana Bockel, remembers that something went down after he left. Matthew discovered that the woman he would propose to over the night, Livy, stayed at Bobby's. His anger surged and his night was doomed in advance. Montana believed Matthew overheard Livy's decision, and that's when things really went south. Matthew went back to the party, and what followed was chaotic. He tried to choke Montana and then went on a rampage, smashing car windows and kicking doors. Bobby Ozan stepped in, physically restraining Matthew against a car so that Montana and the others could escape safely. Montana and Livy drove off to Matthew's mom's house for safety, but Matthew wasn't done. He followed them in his van and confronted Montana again, this time with their kids in the back seat. In a panic, Montana honked the horn to get attention, but after a while she had no choice but to leave when Matthew went back to his place. Shaken and scared, Montana stayed at her family's house, but the situation wasn't over. She started texting Matthew, and that's when things took a terrifying turn. Matthew started sending her threatening messages. accusing her of somehow being behind Livy's decision to stay with Bobby. The texts were filled with violent threats and chilling warnings, including one that simply said, "I'm leaving. Better get here and get your kids." As if that wasn't enough, Matthew, still drunk and angry, grabbed his rifle, jumped in his truck, and went looking for Livy. Later, he sent Montana another text saying, "I'm home. I got Livy's keys and her phone." When Montana asked where Livy was, Matthew's reply sent a shiver down her spine. Dead. Montana, at first, did not think Matthew was being serious. She never called 911, thinking it was just an outburst on his part. Instead, she sent him a text asking if she could come over, and he replied that she was welcome to. But then something went terribly wrong. Montana says Matthew's mother stopped her from leaving and eventually she fell asleep. When she woke up around 6 a.m., she did not know what had happened. But Matthew didn't sleep. He got up, and evidence later showed he returned to the crime scene in his cousin's truck after sending that chilling text about Livy. The truck was found behind Livy's car, which was suspicious enough to raise some serious questions for investigators. Montana's decision not to call 911 confused a lot of people, including Livy's friend Bailey. Bailey thought she should have alerted the authorities, especially after those threats. There was even chatter about Montana potentially being involved in helping Matthew hide Livy's murder. However, she swore that was far from the case. 2 months after that, Montana sat for a polygraph test, where when asked whether or not she was covering up the person responsible for killing Livy, she failed. But that created even more confusion until it all added up. The one at fault was indeed Matthew Edgar. Back in February 2021, Matthew was let out on a $50,000 bond. And Darcy did not take kindly to that at all. In fact, she was furious, and getting the news probably didn't make it any easier. Several months later, Darcy ran into Matthew at a convenience store, accused him straight out of killing her daughter, lost her cool on him, got arrested for assault, and still had the charges thrown out. Then in March 2021, everything took a dark turn when a grand jury indicted Matthew for the murder of Livy. But still, he was out on bond, and this was making things even more miserable for Livy's family. Darcy thought the evidence like blood and text messages would prove to be too much for Matthew and that it was his jealousy that killed Livy. On the morning of the trial, Matthew's mom phoned Rob Hughes, saying that her son was gone with a gun and that she was worried he might shoot himself. Apparently, Matthew had learned how to get out of his ankle monitor before taking off. The authorities took all this in stride, mobilizing SWAT along with Texas Rangers to find him, scouring 2 miles of woods to pursue him. Even though Matthew was gone, the trial continued. Hughes had to prod the defense at every turn, but the jury didn't know that Matthew ran off, so it made his job a heck of a lot tougher. It didn't take the jury long to convict Matthew of murder, just an hour and a half of deliberation. But the creepy part, he was still on the loose, out there and potentially dangerous. Darcy, feeling a mix of fear and confusion, couldn't shake the fact that this man, who once claimed to love her daughter, had taken her life and was still free. Feeling like no one was really hunting him down, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She distributed handmade wanted posters wherever she could fit them in and around town. Before long, Jeff Coulter, the special deputy U.S. Marshals, showed up, joined with J.P. McDonough. From the minute he met the young man, Coulter had something of a misgiving, a bad feeling as he sized the fugitive and what he considered to be information about the very serious crime, at least. For nearly a year, Coulter never stopped, from following every single lead with law enforcement all around the country to long nights and weekends spent in pursuit of just one more. Then came that one day they received one big lead about Matthew being held in a house yards away from his grandparents, surrounded by deep woods. The property belonged to their family friend. Coulter didn't waste any time. He quickly organized a plan for them to attack the house during nightfall under night vision, ensuring he could have a clear look at Matthew. They set off during the afternoon because they knew the darkness would mask their movement. Coulter was leading, while JP and his deputies were at the other side of the property and ready to move in when they knew that Matthew was in. So as they approached the house, about 100 yards away, they could hear a big Rottweiler barking like crazy in the backyard. And then, from the thick darkness, they barely caught the sound of 2 voices, a man and a woman. Right then, a crazy thunderstorm hit with the rain pouring down, lightning cracking, and thunder booming. It was uncomfortable, surely, but the storm sort of worked in their favor, in covering up their movements. By 8 p.m., Coulter's team was only about 30 yards from the house. They crouched in the shadows, and that's when they saw a guy step off the porch and start walking around the side of the house. One of Coulter's guys immediately knew it was Matthew Edgar. They quickly radioed the info to JP and the deputies, and that's when everything went into full gear. With no delay, the deputies rushed toward the house, screaming, "Police, Sheriff's Department! Anyone in the house, come out with your hands held up." It was tense closing in on the place, looking to grab Edgar. When Matthew understood that he'd been caught red-handed, he literally threw himself against the wall, frustrated, and muttered, "Oh crap, you got me." Coulter calmly looked at Matthew in the eyes and said, "It's over." He then turned towards JP and asked if they proved his innocence, to which JP replied with a cold shot. He also asked about his mother, stating she was inside, totally blindsided by the whole thing. He sounded overwhelmed, as if he could hardly believe they were taking him to jail for something he didn't even get. Later, Coulter clarified that Matthew's mom was not arrested at that time, and when they were moving Matthew out of there, he requested his seizure medication. Cindy Hogan, Matthew's mom, has been charged with hindering apprehension. Finally, on January 3, 2023, Matthew Edgar received a 99-year prison term for the murder of Livy Lewis. However, he will be eligible for parole in 30 years. It was a significant sentence, but it did not really bring peace to the Lewis family, especially not to Livy's sister, Darcy. Darcy could not help but believe that Matthew would never really change. She decided to honor her sister by keeping her spirit alive in a way that would make Livy proud, not as just someone who tragically died, but as the vibrant, beautiful person she was. So what do you think about this case? Was Matthew a sociopath and womanizer? Why really do you think he killed Livy? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel for more cases like this. See you soon.